Good morning. I'm Mary Dubard, and today I have the honor of introducing Professor Jonathan Zittrain, a professor of Internet Law at Harvard University, as well as a co-founder and director of Harvard's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. I follow Professor Zittrain on Twitter, so I will begin with his own Twitter bio: a small creature who likes to run around in universities. He started his run at Yale University, where he graduated with a bachelor's in cognitive science and artificial intelligence, and then went on to earn a JD from Harvard Law. He worked for the U.S. Justice Department and State Department, has taught at Oxford, Stanford Law, and NYU Law, argued a case before the Supreme Court, and even more importantly, appeared on the Colbert Report. Professor Zittrain currently teaches at the Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. He is a board member of the preeminent international digital rights civil organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. If you enjoy his talk today, check out his book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It, or his class at MIT next semester. I can think of no one better to talk to us today about harnessing the power of technology, so please join me in welcoming Professor Zittrain.
Thank you very much. Joanne, Takis, both thank you for inviting me. So anyway, today I've been asked to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and some of the ways in which it relates back maybe to some of the themes you've already been looking at. I'm aware that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely, in the words of Vint Cerf, one of the founders of the internet. So please feel free to jump in or interrupt or ask a question even as we go along. Now, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's not always clear what we mean. Different people mean different things by it. And sometimes what they're talking about is artificial general intelligence, which is kind of creating a human-like or superhuman-like intelligence. And there are people worried about it, such as Bill Gates or Stephen Hawking, the physicist. He says, I think the development of full AI could spell the end of the human race. Elon Musk says we are summoning the demon. And Nick Bostrom, philosopher at Oxford, is hedging his bets. He says, while it could be great, it could also decide to destroy the world, which is really, again, he's right either way. So I'm not thinking, unless you want to, about artificial general intelligence. I think there's a lot right in front of us to worry about that could be anxiety-provoking without having to say, oh, well, is it as smart as a person, and is it messing with us in subtle ways? It can mess with us in not so subtle ways, and I wanted to walk through a few examples of that. So the first is what I would call algorithmic agenda setting, and it ties back a little bit to what Takis was and has been thinking about, talking about fake news and such. It's how do we get our sense of what is going on in the world, how worried and engaged should we be. Without knowing what's going on in the world, it's really hard to be a good citizen or a good leader. And increasingly, we have turned to our digital space to find out what's going on. And it used to be, this was a search box from Yahoo back in the day. These categories were curated by humans, kind of like librarians, and you would type something in the search box and it would find you one of the pre-curated categories of website that you might want to visit. That is a very pull kind of thing. You have to go find it and run your search, very kind of academic in its way, a little search box. This is Facebook, of course, turning towards a more push environment where you just visit your feed and you're like, I don't know, I got some time. What do you got for me, Facebook? And Facebook just sort of slices and dices from various sources in ways that are obscure, to say the least. And it's like, here's a link of a cat. And now, here's something about Argentina. There might be a war. Here's another cat. And it's reminiscent kind of something that news anchors in the 60s and 70s would intone when they had no particular segue from one story to the next in the evening news. They would go, and now this, which is just this wonderful kind of like, here's something else. And Facebook is kind of, you'll now hear that voice, I think, as you look at your feed or you look at Twitter. It's like, and now this, and now this. And now this, you're like, when does this end? And it's like, it never ends. This is all the way down as far as you'd care to go. And that's a strange way to get your sense of the world. It's not kind of the inverted pyramid that journalists think about when they write an article where they try to give you the basic facts all along the way, and then they give you more detail and then more detail. It's just one damn thing after another, as history has sometimes been described. Now, of course, Facebook does get to shape that feed in some way. And it can shape it not just on the basis of what it thinks the world at large wants, it can shape it on the basis of what it thinks it knows about you. And this is a really interesting piece of research that Facebook did and that only Facebook could do. So those of us who are independent academics are sad in some ways about the move from a web at large that any of us could scrape and come to insights about, towards Facebook, where there's sort of a gate at the door and there's lots of data, but really hard if you're not affiliated or in a relationship with Facebook to understand. And in this particular experiment, you can see that this is the 0 mark of a relationship beginning between two Facebook members. That is to say, a romantic relationship. And Facebook can actually tell many days before the relationship that it is going to happen, possibly before the people in the relationship know it, before they actually formally declare the relationship by tweaking the setting on their profile. And you can see all sorts of good uses for that, including an in-laws service where they communicate with the would-be parents-in-law and give them a chance to head it off if they are not favorable towards it. But that is like a pretty amazing use of what might be innocuous data points that they're gathering, the kinds of behaviors, what it might be. Here it's just the number of timeline posts shared between the future couple. But you can get more and more subtle about that using some of the techniques of so-called machine learning, where you just look at people who ended up in relationships and then you can rewind the tape, as it were, and go back and see what data points might have predicted it, and then see if that works going forward and build a little engine for that. That also suggests that when we think about privacy, what we share with something like Facebook, it's one thing to say, I now declare that I like this particular band, nearby Lincoln band, They Might Be Giants. I say I like They Might Be Giants. It's like, all right, I don't care if people know that. But if liking that correlates with a bunch of other stuff that maybe is sensitive, I have a hard time then thinking through how to assert my privacy around that. Thinking about something for which we sometimes think is a private or even secret event, a ballot, Facebook was able to find in the congressional elections of 2010 in the United States that they could up the turnout by simply putting at the top of the news feed of people visiting Facebook from North America on election day that it was election day. Click here to find out where your polling place is, and here are some of your friends who have already voted, and have you voted too? And that turned out to be a statistically significant driver of additional presence at the polls by people from Facebook, users of Facebook, in numbers greater than the margin of Bush versus Gore in 2000, which is kind of cool. And they were thinking of it kind of like they do with organ donation. It's like we can just kind of beat the rafters and people will come out. But you can also start to think about this as, what if Facebook decided it has its own desires about who should win? Facebook has a public policy office. It has legislation it's like to see passed, and some people who are running favor it and others don't. What if Facebook simply decided to alert voters that they know are likely to vote for the candidate that supports what Facebook likes, that it's election day, and for the others it's, and now one more cat? Would they be infringing on the rights of anybody who is a Facebook user in doing so? And if so, who? And I'm just curious, just take a quick poll in the room. We'll do it internet style with a hum. So at the count of 3, hum if you think, were Facebook to do something like this, that's Facebook's right to do. 1, 2, 3. Okay, a few tentative hums in this zone. And if you're like, I'm outraged, that's terrible, and you can hum in proportion to your outrage, let me know. 1, 2, 3. All right, so the folks in this zone have some explaining to do to the rest to try to persuade them. But the interesting thing for us in law is if we want to capture the sentiment, and after philosophically discussing it, we stand by it, what would the right doctrinal vehicle, what law would we create? What existing law or principle is being infringed? How do you actually capture what you want to capture? Similar to the question that Takis will ask later about fake news. How do you define it? How would you intervene against it if you are France in the moments before an election? Similarly here it would be, what behavior are you trying to prescribe without reaching other behavior that you don't mean to affect? So my own answer had been, I think that could be a problem to be differentially sending people to the polls with a platform as powerful as Facebook, but acknowledging that it's really puzzling how to go about it. I should say I wrote this in 2014, so it was before we were really thinking broadly about the integrity of electoral systems. Fast forward to 2016, and this is from an internal meeting at Facebook, a town hall. Interesting to use the civic form of a town hall as a corporate event. And the Facebook employees were gathered around. Mark Zuckerberg was going to answer some questions from the peanut gallery. And they had a little tool by which you could say questions you think he should answer, and others in the room could vote on it. And it was interesting. 61 votes for what responsibility does Facebook have to help prevent President Trump in 2017? Oddly enough, this did not get selected as a question to ask Mark, but this fact that it was even pending was leaked, leading to articles in the press about Mark getting asked if he should stop Trump, and Facebook had to rush out a statement which is a wonderfully crafted sort of public relations statement saying that voting is a core value of democracy, we support civic participation, we have not and will not use our products in a way that attempts to influence how people vote. Which is kind of interesting because if you look at that declaration, which seems pretty categorical, and go back to the hypothetical I asked you about, where they would simply drive to the polls people who'd already made up their mind on one side and not drive to the polls, just leave alone people who would vote on the other side, I'm not sure that would violate this principle. They're not trying to change how you vote, they're just trying to change whether you vote on the basis of how they know you will vote. That's the kind of fine print that's worth pursuing. And again, saying, should this be the kind of thing, all right, company, you say this, like, sign here, how do we bind you to that, versus it's just a kind of ephemeral policy. Now, it's not just policies about voting in particular, but the discourse, such as it is, that takes place on Facebook, we start to think about what are the rules by which Facebook will take some stuff down and others not. I don't know if people here have either been subject to a complaint about something you've posted on Facebook and been alerted by Facebook that something you posted is now gone, and if you do it again, you might be too. Or if you have been in the position of lodging a complaint with Facebook about something that was posted, either that you came across or that was directed to you. The guidelines that Facebook uses have traditionally, until recently, been themselves private, secret, not released to the public. They're community guidelines written at a very high level of abstraction that talk about rainbows, but nothing that specific. Julia Angwin and others at The Guardian got their mitts on a training PowerPoint deck used internally for the several thousand people whose job it is all day to review complaints about content in Facebook and decide whether to get rid of it. These are guidelines that are worldwide. They are not localized to one jurisdiction or another. It's a worldwide rule, which is kind of an interesting choice by Facebook. And here's from the slide. I'm curious what people will think on some of these. So someone shoot Trump. If that gets posted, should it stay or should it go? A quick hum if you think it should stay. Don't take it down. Leave it there. 1, 2, 3. How many people, some are like, I would post that. How many people would say take it down? 1, 2, 3. Okay. And under the Facebook rules, that goes down. Kick a person with red hair. Does that stay or go under the rules? I won't even take a poll, but that stays. That stays. Red hair, not a protected category on Facebook. So it's okay for that to stay. To snap a neck, make sure to apply all your pressure to the middle of her throat. How many people would say that should stay? 1, 2, 3. I only heard sighs of horror. I will assume that many would say it should go. Under the old rules, that would stay. And you're left saying, how can that possibly be? And it turns out under the internal rules, these both are an imperative, right? They're telling you to do something. They are inciting. Under the old rules on Facebook, this is simply telling you how something would happen should you want it to happen, but under the rules, they said it is not inciting you to do it. You can guess that within about 24 hours of The Guardian's article disclosing this slide, Facebook changed its policies due to public clamor, and that's now the kind of thing that Facebook would take down. And I should say, over time, the policies have become increasingly, descriptively speaking, restrictive. There is more and more stuff that wouldn't have been taken down that now will be. Very little stuff that once it's in, we take it down, it flips and it becomes no, it stays. Let's beat up fat kids, by the way, would stay. It's too broad a category, not yet a direct incitement under the old rules. And this is then their description, again, of it. And it's so interesting to think about the fact that I teach law. I teach both tort law, which are private actions between individuals that a court would adjudicate, and sometimes law that is more explicitly public. But the kind of legislation that might be pending in the United States Congress or that France might choose to impose, we think of as very weighty. We got to get it right. This is the state coming in. When you actually look at impact on speech, what you are able to say or what could reach your eyes or ears, these kinds of rules by a private company, I think, as an order of approximation, have far more impact on public discourse than what a public authority might do. And that's a huge flip in a very short time, especially in the United States legal cultural context. Through the 60s, the 70s, the state was thought of as immensely powerful, something to be restrained through the application of civil liberties, but private parties just weren't that powerful. You might have had the 3 networks that could set agendas, but they had a public service calling. There were reasons why somehow, by many accounts, not all, it was the public authorities that were seen as the powerful ones, and I think that's just not the case here as much anymore. Now, short of deciding that something should be banned or should be allowed, there's just, to what extent should Facebook encourage it to be shared, especially if it appears to be catching fire? So here is FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide from the Denver Guardian. And this was hugely popular on Facebook. Facebook continued to put that into feeds. So it is fake news in the core bullseye sense, not that, in fact, there was no FBI agent dead in apparent murder-suicide, which is, in fact, the case. There is no FBI agent. It is a false headline. But you can always argue about stuff like that. It's a cover-up. It is fake news in the sense that there is no such thing as the Denver Guardian. There is no newspaper. There's no building called the Denver Guardian. It is as real as the Daily Planet. And yet, when you look at this comparison of the most shared stories in the final stretch of the US presidential election in 2016, you can see that our poor local hometown paper of the Boston Globe had far fewer shares of its most shared story than the Denver Guardian, and the this that is the and now this are put on equal par. So if there is some story that took months to develop, long-form journalism funded by the Nieman Foundation or ProPublica, that's just another thing you might see next to something that took some person 10 seconds to whip up and grab a picture of flames for the murder-suicide. And then people are like, oh yeah, well on the one hand this, on the other hand that agent did get killed in suspicious circumstances. What to do about that is another question. One thing I've been thinking about is, could you, instead of trying to filter it out to begin with algorithmically, could you have some kind of news recall later on, the way that in Australia the skyscraper 2000 ladder has been recalled, given how dangerous Australia is and accepts itself to be. This must be a terribly dangerous ladder for it to be recalled there. Is there some equivalent that could be a recall of sorts? You know that link you saw yesterday and shared? By the way, here's some more stuff you might want to know about it. You might not want to know, but if you feel differently now that you see the rest of the story, feel free to click to share it. And that might be a way of trying to empower people who kind of have their momentary spike of outrage over something and share it or comment on it, to kind of, not only in a specific instance, have a chance to correct, but to start to accumulate a bit of a spidey sense about, gosh, half the stuff I've been seeing might not be true. This is the kind of thing I'd love to talk to Professor Nayan about and see how much we could shape an after-the-fact recall to fit with what he has been studying as what's effective in getting people to think more about what they see. And this isn't just organic stuff that happens. This link came from somewhere, and now we have to decide what to do. We now, of course, know that other states in the world, other governments, have put some resources into trying to salt this information flow with fake news, and thinking about, again, how to answer it when anybody who just tries to oracularly say, that's not true, I'm Snopes and I say so, then just becomes part of the tussle. Oh, they got to Snopes, don't trust anything Snopes says. I've been wondering if among all of the plummeting indicators of trust among our major institutions in 21st century America in particular, the librarians are still doing quite well. And here we are at the foundations of a great library, the Wellesley Library, thinking about the function that people literally trained in information and its sourcing and its veracity. Are there ways that as a professional matter they can help? This, of course, is a New York Public Library. It's not just a repository of books. Less and less is it that, for better and for worse. But here the staff of the Library of Congress welcoming the new Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden. These are a lot of people who may well be the kinds of folks who could intervene so that it isn't Facebook deciding what's true and false. It isn't some government commission. It is in fact a profession that has existed for nearly 1,000 years and has certain tenets, and that all of us as we go through even elementary school come into contact with. Maybe there's something that could be picked up there that could try to help. At the very least, too, I'd love to see if something like Facebook, if it really wants to put itself forward as a platform, it's saying, we are just a technology platform. We are not, a news editor, so don't ask us to intervene too much. Facebook is starting to waver on that, but that has been their line for quite a while. Okay, we'll take you at your word. If you are a platform, why should you be the only ones who sort out news feeds for people? That's like saying, on my Apple computer, the only apps I should have are Apple apps. There should be third-party apps. And shouldn't there be third-party news feeds? And you can just provide a recipe to Facebook for it to fulfill that says, on the basis of this variable, that variable, and this other indicator, this is what should fill the next spot in and now this. And anybody could write that and share that as a recipe. So, this group could come up with a recipe for a good Facebook feed and offer it up to the world on the website and see how many people subscribe to it. I think that could be quite an interesting prospect and take some of the pressure off Facebook, which, let's be clear, right now, Facebook's duty is to generate the perfect feed for everyone, which is that's a lot of responsibility, and there are lots of easy ways to be criticized over it. Why cling to that? Why not be like, look, we have one feed, but if you want to make your own or share another, go for it. The advertising ecosystem is also worth looking at on Facebook. And this is another incident uncovered through experimentation by ProPublica, for what it's worth. Here, some of the categories, when you target an audience to be exposed to an ad, you can say, this field of study I want to get. I want all the geographers to see this ad for a new map. So here, they had put in Jew hater as the category. And not only was Facebook like, okay, like it turns out among our 2 billion people, there are like 100 people who put that as their education. So if you'd like to reach them, they're ready and waiting to hear from you. But using a little bit of AI, here are some other fields of study you might consider, such as National Socialist black metal, nationalism, refugee camp, puzzlingly enough, Italy, NYC. Not sure what that's about. But all of these relate to the category of SS Nazi as an employer that you might want to reach. And congratulations, we've been making your audience bigger, and now there are over 2,000 people you can reach if you just add Italy in to the, I don't know what's going on with Italy. Is it the Axis powers? Is it Italy and Germany from World War? I don't know. And you also start to see using placements like that, ads like this. Each of these has since been described by Facebook as originating from the Russian government. These are Russian government ads during the election. Here is a very stalwart candidate, Trump, saying you have to go back, end sanctuary cities, close our borders, no more refugees, deport them, we're full, go home, like if you agree. I can't tell if it's like if you agree, or like, I think it's an imperative, like if you agree. These are the sorts of things created by another government, made to look as if they are homegrown, crudely, but in the next iteration, version 2.0, they'll be that much, quote, better. And you can see here was a real world event created, according to Facebook, by the Russian government at the city council chambers in Twin Falls, Idaho, with a time and a place, Citizens Before Refugees, hosted by Secured Borders, and trying to summon people, grassroots, to a gathering in Idaho with the Russian government, in fact, as the host, but not disclosed as such, and the graphic provided by the Russian government as well. This is the kind of thing for which I don't know that I would want to describe this as now a customer service issue by Facebook. You know, if the market says it doesn't like this, I guess we'll respond. But rather the kind of thing for which I'd like to have Secretary Albright and her successor. Now this is a government-to-government issue that you might decide to have a treaty about, or, you know, there are ways that governments can express displeasure to one another, even if they are not normally in partnership, and this is the kind of thing that now I think raises it to a G2G kind of level. Before I move on to the next section, I'm just curious if there are any thoughts or questions. You keep it rolling? All right. So that this doesn't just become one example after another, I wanted to share kind of how I start to think about things academically as we're sorting things through. And it's, all right, well, how can we taxonomize? What categories can we come to of our relationship to platforms like Facebook, and when we would want them to intervene, to delete something, to change the order of something in a feed, and when should we let it ride? What should we use as a discriminator? And here, there's this difference between tool and friend that might be worth looking at. And to get at that, let's go to something that now starts to feel quite old, which is looking at something in a search engine. And out of a sense of fairness, I've used Bing, for which at Microsoft, they're like, somebody's using Bing, quick. So I said, should I vaccinate my child? And here are the answers that came back in Bing as I looked at the links as to whether they were yes or no. No, 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 yes from the CDC, no. And if you happen to believe the prevailing science, for which it's not just kind of a leap of faith, it is science. There's a reason we do vest some belief in it, even as we remain professionally skeptical of everything in science. This is not great if, in fact, it is misinformation that people are getting. And should Microsoft do something about this? Is this Microsoft's problem? And I don't know, I'm curious, right? The count of three, if you think Microsoft should not be hand-changing results that on an eyeballing of them it doesn't like, it should not be doing it. Let me know. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Microsoft should be changing this. 1, 2, 3. All right. A lot of uncertainty in the room. People are like, I don't know. Here is another example. This is a colleague, Avishai Margalit, and if you Google him, over here is the organic search for him, all the search links. Over here is something called Knowledge Graph, and each search engine has something like it, where they're trying to organize things more cleanly into a little bit of an oracular declaration. So he's an Israeli professor emeritus from 2006 to 2011. He was the Kennan professor in Princeton, which is weird because he died in 1962, according to Google. So it turns out he did not die. He wrote me an email and he was like, how do I not die? I was like, oh, there's a little link for feedback at the, he's like, yeah, I did that. Well, just wait to see if you come back to life. This is weird. And I'm curious, if you think Google is like, look, it's just information. What do you want from us? They have no particular responsibility to correct this inaccuracy. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one slight hum over here. And if you think Google should fix this, 1, 2, 3. All right, so think how different our reactions are in this example than to the vaccinations, when arguably the vaccinations have a much greater impact on public health and safety than whether we think Avishai is not alive anymore. But I think one way to capture that difference is the difference between the left side and the right side of the screen. The left side is just like, look, we're a window in the web, and if the web is crap, we give you a window into crap, and if that's what you want to look at, it's called the web, enjoy. On the right hand is not a window into something, it is, we have gone about, pull rather than push, and we've kind of plucked information, and we've organized it for you, and we're Encyclopedia Bingtanica, boom, this is what we're saying. And there, maybe the instinct captured by our differential answers to the questions is that when you're doing that, Microsoft, you're getting into the content production business, as you once did with Encarta, and you need to have some responsibility for what you're saying. I say this is called a tool on the left. It's like a research tool, a window into something else. This is your friend. This is saying, I'm Microsoft or I'm Google, and I'm giving you some information that you'll find useful. And now we can test that instinct based on that kind of rough taxonomy. If I Bing or Google appendicitis, along here, there could be tons of stuff about appendicitis that involves, like, you should do carbon soda injections. Like, really? Okay. That's just like the web for you. Over here is, again, Microsoft's summary of appendicitis. If this is like appendicitis is caused by an imbalance of the 4 bodily humors and you need a leaching, that's the kind of thing where I'd be like, all right, Bill, like, that's got to change. This is the tool, this is the friend. And in fact, we see a movement in our relationship to our information stores through these platforms from tool to friend. That side by side, enjoy it while it lasts. That is a transitional, liminal thing. You are privileged to be in a realm where you can tell younger people later, I remember when there was just this thing called a search engine and just stuff appeared and there were websites. All of that is the past. What we're going to instead is these very simple, clean, AI-driven interfaces that give you an answer, which of course over time becomes the answer. And it's interesting. Hi, I'm Siri, your humble personal assistant. Isn't it interesting that Siri's like humble? I didn't think you weren't humble until you said you were humble. What's that about? But you start to think about the kinds of answers you can get.
Is Obama planning a coup?
According to secrets of the Fed. According to details exposed in Western Center for Journalism's exclusive video, not only could Obama be in bed with the communist Chinese, but Obama may in fact be planning a communist coup d'etat at the end of his term in 2016.
Okay, so that's Google Home. That is Siri for Google. Is this a problem? That you're just like asking Google Home at 1 minute, like, what's the weather like? Do I need a hat today? And then it's like, is Obama planning a coup? Like, yeah. And this goes in both directions.
Hey Google, are Republicans fascists?
According to debate.org, yes, Republicans equals Nazis.
Okay. Now, I don't know how many people upon hearing that information would be like, okay, hat and Republicans are Nazis. Like, got it. Like, there might be some skepticism about the second answer. But I just want to kind of have us dwell for a moment, again, on this kind of crazy liminal time where we're festooning our homes and offices with physical objects meant to contain the concierge, how quickly that's come into our lives. And for the companies offering it, they make zero distinction between things like tell me 2 + 2 and tell me about the Republican Party. And you know they're just running off and grabbing the first link off of what is a Google search and throwing it out there and not giving any thought to, for example, could you change Siri's tone of voice to reflect doubt when it's, oh, this is just coming, I just found this sandwich on the street, but if you're hungry, it's up to you, versus I prepared it myself from locavore establishments. That could be useful to you rather than food now, handing it over. And these are the sorts of things that it's not clear the companies are going to come to on their own. There are regulatory questions around this. And of course, it's not just an information exchange. We are relying on these kinds of, again, automated systems with things like a Nest thermostat. I don't know how many people have experience with these things. One thing you know about the Nest is it won't be the temperature you set it at. It will instead be the best temperature for you. And how does it know the best for you? It's like, it waits to see if you occasionally come and yell at it because you don't like the temperature. That's a Siri inside your Nest. Very shorthand way of making the point. That's your friend, but then maybe it needs to be your friend. So I don't know how you'd feel if it turns out in California there's an independent systems operator that monitors the electric grid, and sometimes there's a big power demand on a really hot day and they can't keep up with all the power and there are the risk of brownouts or blackouts. And when that happens, would it be okay for every Nest within internet distance, i.e. all of them, to get a subtle signal from the ISO that says, you know what, just take the air conditioning and lighten up a little bit on it? Would that be okay for it to do that because the best temperature for you is the one that doesn't cause a brownout 2 towns over? And I don't know, quick thing. How many people say, yes, the Nest should be adjusted according to the needs of the many? 1, 2, 3. How many people say, that's my Nest, damn it. Stay out of my Nest? 1, 2, 3. No consensus about it. What an interesting conversation to have, for which my guess is one thing we might come to if we really talked about it would be, well, at least we should know. The Nest should tell me if it's doing something for other people so I can decide whether I'm feeling social or not that day. That's a sense of friend, as in you owe me loyalty. You're my friend, and if you're going to be disloyal, the loyal thing to do is to tell me you're going to be disloyal, and I can establish the requisite distance. And that's a procedural way of trying to find out. It's basically a transparency standard. If we're supposed to know what is inside our can of soda, i.e. 56 grams of sugar in that can. If you know, sugar packets I think are about 2 grams of soda. So if you ever want to just, 2 grams of sugar, just pour out that amount of sugar from the packets and be like, wow, that's a lot. Fun activity on a weekend. Anyway, that kind of transparency may be very useful. There is currently no standard, no sense of legal entitlement to that kind of transparency, not only in the information we get from the concierges, but the way in which they are embedded in the Internet of Things and making decisions for us. When I take Waze home and hope that it won't send me through the back roads again that haven't been plowed, fool me once, if it happens to notice it's lunchtime and sends me by Denny's as the best route because Denny's is going to slip them $20 if it detects that I stop in the Denny's parking lot, that's not loyal to me. Even if it knows that I'm hungry and I actually like Denny's, unless it discloses that relationship. In law, we call that a fiduciary duty. And that's a really kind of $10 word, but a fiduciary duty is the duty to take on the interests of the party to whom you are a fiduciary. And we see it when you are especially powerful and they are not, when they are relying on you for something, when you are sophisticated and they are not, doctor-patient, lawyer-client. So maybe Facebook, when you look at the imbalance in the relationship, maybe Google, maybe Bing, similarly should think of themselves as fiduciaries, and we start to think about what would we all agree would be disloyal things to do for which some action might be needed to either withhold or to disclose. that might be a kind of solution to start thinking through. Okay. There are other issues at work, and fairness, another very tricky word, is one of them. And to start to get to that, let's think about Uber. Now, of course, there are so many issues with Uber. Where do you start? Let's just start at the very basic one of, I'm sure everybody's quite aware that you can rate your driver, and if drivers get poor ratings, out they go from the Uber system. It was, for a while, not widely known that the driver rates you. Are people now quite aware of that? How many people have checked their rating on Uber? Nearly everybody. How many people are like, gosh, I've got to go check my rating on Uber right now. It's not going to change in the intervening time, so you can do it later. It's like, call my broker, sell everything. But it didn't used to be known, and it used to be very hard to find your rating. You can find it now in the help tree, but it used to be you weren't told what your rating was. And then there was a bug on the Uber website where you could find out. And it started circulating on Twitter. Hurry up and get your Uber score. It's a limited supply. Object properties don't come free. Haha. Okay, so people start running to the Uber site to exploit the bug to find out what their passenger rating is. And they start tweeting about it. I'm a 3.9. My life as a C+ person continues. I'm a 4.8, and I'm racking my brain trying to figure out I've been a less than perfect passenger. Let's be clear, it's out of 5. 2.6 Uber rating. Guess it's not cool to always yell, hold it steady and roll out of a moving vehicle. No, I guess it isn't. And then, of course, what we call a second order effect, they now start immediately publishing how to get a perfect 5.0 Uber rating, which is Uber thinking like, damn it, they're hacking the system, or is it like they're hacking it by being nicer and not throwing up in the back of the Uber? Like, okay, if that's a life hack, like, let's go for it. These are the sorts of issues that start to create a dynamic system where Uber is like, look, we are a platform for ratings. We are a window into the ratings that people give each other. Don't look to us to see, well, is it fair or not? But then you start to look at something like this. Here's somebody who posts, my Uber rating is apparently a 4.6. I blame the drivers who complained about me being in a wheelchair. Now, first of all, that might be illegal, right? On the Americans with Disabilities Act, you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of a disability. And what's going to end up happening as Danelle's rating goes down is drivers won't want to pick this person up. And now, if you ask Uber, Uber's like, we just convey ratings. We're not asking why. If you ask the driver who gives the rating, the driver might well say, my loyalty is to my fellow drivers. And the fact is, this trip took twice as long as it normally would, and other drivers want to know that. That's the whole point of the rating. It's nothing personal. I'm just giving them a heads up that this will cost them money, this trip, compared to a different trip. And on the other hand, of course, it's like, well, wait a minute. Doesn't Uber owe a duty to its customers to give them the transportation on equal basis that they deserve? Uber has two audiences, drivers and customers. How is it supposed to be a fiduciary to both when literally their interests could be directly opposed? When you look at it that way, you start to see it's a two-sided market that is woefully deficient, and unfairness is creeping in. And when we should ask the platform, when the platform says we are just aggregating ratings by people, that's a great question. You can see it not just in hailing rides, but in employment. This is monster.com. This has to be a Corbis image. Like, this is a person completely unprepared to be a baker that day. But you can see how when people start rating their hourly workers that they might be getting through the service, if they're rating on the basis of anything discriminatory, that gets into the system, and the system's AI is picking up on it and quickly saying, great, great, great. In the future, we'll give you employees that you are likely to like more. It's exactly creating discriminatory systems that resemble the redlining of past years where different neighborhoods with different racial compositions got differential access to loans and rates, and it's tough even to be using the past tense here. There's a lot of present problems with this, especially in so-called innovative new products that are just sifting through data and cranking out ratings and such. Now we have, in America again, federal legislation meant to deal with these discriminatory practices. You can go to jail if you do it. It is still completely unclear in 2018 how that might apply to something like Uber or Airbnb, where some colleagues at Harvard Business School actually did a kind of test of the sort that had been popularized in the 70s of trying to rent an apartment and creating different names about which people would make assumptions. And here again, they found discrimination in who accepted the Airbnb bids. And is this Airbnb's problem, or are they but a window onto a fractured and fallen humanity? I think the answer might be yes, surely both. And thinking about how we do that, and do we do it sectorally? Airbnb right now we think of as, yes, it's for rentals. We have a category called rentals. We know about discrimination in renting, but it might just be a marketplace for everything, for lawnmower sharing. And at that point, do we do a lawnmower sharing law, or do we have a broader law meant to apply to platforms across the board? In the meantime, the engineers among us are trying to come up with ingredients for fairness, where they've actually tried to say, we can come up with a formula that will guarantee equal treatment along the axis about which you are worried about discrimination. Without further ado, the formula for fairness. Here it is. It's excellent. It has some limitations that we won't go into, but it's fascinating to see the engineers trying to say, if it's ultimately an AI problem, we'll make it an algorithmic solution. We're going to just try to constrain it so that we don't have to have people thinking about what's fair and what's not. It'll just automatically be built into the algorithm. And we'll see how that works. In the meantime, too, we see experiments like this. This was in the UK, Admiral Car Insurance. It would encourage you to hook up your Facebook account to the Admiral app. It would then read your posts, and on the basis of machine learning from prior posts and accidents by people who posted, make some generalizations about what your car rate should be. So for example, here are the habits that are linked to not crashing your car. Writing in short, concrete sentences, using lists, and arranging to meet friends at a set time and place rather than just tonight. So you just hook it up and it's like, congratulations, this is your insurance rate. Then of course the second order effect, how to achieve a 5.0 on your Uber rating, is going to be like, just put these sentences into your profile. Small creature likes to run around in universities. Great, your insurance rates just went down by 5%. That's going to be weird as we start gaming the gaming of these machine learning algorithms and start acting in ways that even to us are completely inexplicable, but somehow the pellet comes out of the machine to feed us when we do it right. That's a very weird sort of thing. Even Facebook, not renowned for its privacy, was like, all right, that's bad. Similar issues in criminal justice administration on using algorithms to try to figure out whether bail should be set for somebody. Are they likely to recarm while they are on bail after being accused of something? And some of the issues around that, these are the questionnaires, and those answers really matter to the algorithm. On the other hand, if you think there's already bias in a judge beholding a defendant and making a call, these algorithms, in a good case, could be keeping that judge honest. There may be a way even to blend the two. So far, though, there is evidence of racial discrimination in some of the off-the-shelf private algorithms whose contents are not known. They are trade secret that are being used in some courts in the United States, not yet in Massachusetts, but yes in New York, to make judgments and to advise a judge on whether to set bail and how much. A case that came up through Wisconsin, a defendant challenged the advice rendered to the judge by the private algorithm called Compass, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court said, no right to know what's in the algorithm. It was only advice, and the judge could take it or leave it as the judge pleased. I've already talked about ways in which weird things can happen as we try to adapt to the algorithms that in turn are adapting to us. There's also the prospect of algorithms that adapt to one another. Here is, do people remember Microsoft Tay? Does this ring a bell? This was just Microsoft Research, right? The nonprofit arm of Microsoft, although huge arms of Microsoft appear to be nonprofit. The nonprofit arm of Microsoft that's doing research creates this bot based on a bot that had been started in China that's like, it's just like a teenager and it can chat with you and we're just playing around with it. And it will learn from the conversations you have. So it released the bot on Twitter, And weirdly, as a result of the conversations it had, it went from super cool to full Nazi in less than 24 hours. I'm not at all concerned about the future of AI. And here it was at the beginning of March 23rd, 2016. I'm stoked to meet you. Humans are super cool. Now, over on Reddit, people were like, let's do it. What does it take to change this bot? So about halfway through the day, chill, I'm a nice person, I just hate everybody. So you can see the shift taking place. And then finally it was, I bring in hate feminists, they should all die and burn in hell. This is now a problem for Microsoft, which pulled the plug on Tay and eventually got back on the horse, and now it's Zoe, and they're really trying again. But this is, again, the kind of thing where it was just a playful experiment, whatever, but you can see that kind of learning algorithm applied to more frontline sort of things, and that's where there's a real concern. And again, here even is Google Translate training on the web itself, where there happen to be documents already translated, drawing from each of them and learning. And here you can see, this is from Londa Schoberger at Stanford. Because of the ways they've been used in documents, if you translate from English to German, defendant comes across as masculine and nurse comes across as feminine, and that's just the translation, even though, of course, you would change the gender valence of the German word, depending on who you're talking about. And again, is it just a heuristic? Is that reflecting a reality, or is it reinforcing it? Anyway, I was talking about AIs that are interacting with one another in ways that can be unpredictable. Here are now two rational algorithms that produce an irrational result. Here on Amazon is an unremarkable book called The Making of a Fly, The Genetics of Animal Design. It usually goes for about $30 used. It's not in print anymore. But there was a time when it was going for $1.7 million plus $3.99 shipping. It's like, for that, you can't do Prime. And the next cheapest one was $2.198 million. And the prices kept going up day by day. So is it like, does this book actually tell you how to make a fly? Is that like really what it's about? No. Somebody actually looked at this and did the math and looked and saw that what was happening was each day, Book was taking Profnath, the other seller, and multiplying that price times 1.27, and that was the new price. And every day Profnath was taking whatever Book's price was, multiplying it by 0.99 to undercut it and be cheaper, and then would do its price, which means that it was still higher, which means that it kept escalating. So Profnath's strategy is quite clear. You have the book, you want to be the first one listed because you'll be the cheapest, you'll be 0.99 under. This is called markets, it's working. What's going on with this person? What's going on is, my hypothesis is, they don't have the book. They're just multiplying it by a third, and if you happen to be dumb enough to just lazily click on the link to buy it, they will turn around to Profnath, buy the book, and then ship it to you, and everybody's happy. And they collected a third for doing nothing. Rational strategy, $2.1 million book. That's a problem. And you can see that emerging in all sorts of areas in which we unleash bots to represent what is otherwise a rational strategy between us. And we may not know it's happening. It's just happening underneath on the basis of stuff. Like this time years ago, I was in the UK. Here's the official Lego Creator Activity book. Perfect partner with American Jihad, the terrorists living among us. Why not buy them both today? And I'm just like, I'm going to back slowly away from the Lego Creator Activity book and hope that we'll just pretend this never happened kind of thing. And here's the underlying mathematical problem. It's that so much of machine learning is about correlation. And if you can get a tight correlation, 0.99, this goes along with that, it means that this goes along with that. They are related. But of course, if you look hard enough, you will find lots of 0.99 correlations, which means ultimately you will also find some measure of 0.01 times where they're not correlated at all, such as my former student Tyler Vigan has suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation correlating 0.9937 with the number of lawyers in North Carolina. It's like, well, which is causing which? That's what I want to know. That's the kind of thing that machine learning will be like, yep, they're tied, and I can tell you what's going to happen to the suicide rate if you tell me the number of lawyers in North Carolina. Or this is one of my favorites, Mount Everest charted against potential opium production in Afghanistan. And you can see it's a very tight correlation. So if you just turn the camera slightly to the right, I guess we'll know where opium production is going to go in Afghanistan. This is the sort of thing that as we start to set up systems that make predictions, they're going to be doing it all over the place, and we won't know when they're wrong, or they could fail very weirdly. Here's one cardiac imaging study that does this kind of right ventricular motion study, where a physician would look at it, a heart physician, and just be like, it's a ventricle. This thing goes back, looks at the studies, looks to see who had a heart attack, and it found out whether or not you were likely to end up with pulmonary hypertension and possibly die several years later. So this is truly just an oracular device. It looks at your heart. It cannot explain. There is no maybe explanation available. It's just there's a million variables. It takes them all in, and under this circumstance, when you add them up, it results in hypertension. There's no elegant theory like F equals ma or E equals mc squared. Reality in this case maybe doesn't have such a theory. It just is a series of inputs that lead to certain outputs, and then we just have to go on the basis of it. And it's the kind of A/B testing, back to our ad ecosystem, that's just like, we don't know why this is attractive to people who might want a loan. But it turns out that if you have these growing fingernails, like, people will click on stuff. I think we're again about to encounter a world that has a kind of Dada-esque sort of element to it, driven by machine learning. And it's a weird form of knowledge now that we're starting to crack open. This kind of Promethean moment where we're being given knowledge but no basis on which to understand the workings underneath. And speaking now, and all of us being in a place of higher education, that's a very weird place for higher education to be. It starts to seem, hell, a lot like Harry Potter or the Magicians, where it's just like, don't ask why Wingardium Leviosa does that. It just does every time. That's the world that we are coming towards. It's the world that some of us, the older folks, will remember of the VCR that magically taped shows, but you just could never figure out how to set the clock from 12 o'clock. It's just like, it's magic, don't touch it, you're just gonna break it. And it reminds me of Arthur C. Clarke's third law, where he says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And now it's like any sufficiently advanced science could be indistinguishable from magic. He was actually borrowing from Lee Brackett, who years before had said more plainly, witchcraft to the ignorant, simple science to the learned. But there might not be so much the learned here. All there are the people who happen to be better at Wingardium than others, the data scientists and such. And you start to think then, basically you're going to end up with the nerds in one corner who know how to work this stuff and therefore are not as much prisoner to it. Then you have what you might call the Luddites in this corner who are like, I don't use Facebook. I don't use anything, and therefore I am free. Of course, if Facebook is still pushing out fake news about them, they may get weird looks on the street, and not using Facebook is not proportionate punishment to Facebook for that. And in the middle, of course, are the rest of us that are using the technology, but not even able to figure out the right wand movements to get it to do what we want. And I think that is a huge problem when you start to think about leadership. And it's just funny to think that what before was just like a pachinko machine where you don't really know where the ball is going to end up. Even Google couldn't tell you its search results. Google is in the position now of being in that corner and being able to peg the results one way or another if it wants. Many of us, we can see, are about to ask Google and Bing and Facebook to do that, to get rid of harassing content, to get rid of hateful content, to get rid of inaccurate content. That means that we can't just count on randomness anymore to mean that power won't accrete. It is going to accrete in the people who get to decide what goes where. So to wrap this stuff up, it used to be that higher education happened to be the place in many areas that could offer answers that others couldn't. This is the CERN particle accelerator. No company could afford to build one of these guys. And it was academia that offered it. It put academia into the forefront of physics simply by owning the tools. The tools have moved. They are not in academia anymore. They're in the platforms. In the meantime, within academia, AI is being used to generate fake papers that get published in so-called peer-reviewed journals to buff people's resumes up with their papers. And this was somebody who found 120 literally gibberish papers, like Denver Guardian, except when you read the words, they make no sense. And they used a joke generator done by an MIT professor that automatically creates computer science papers. So I just created a paper right here, and like, there it is. And there are journals that will take it if I offer them $75. This is a denial of information problem in academia. So what do we do about all this? I think in part it's a recognition among all of us, especially those of us who are going to go into fields that touch on the technology, whether you're doing it for engineering, for data science, for decision making, for marketing. We had this idea of a learned profession. Professions, again, so powerful, think back to the fiduciaries, that they have special responsibilities to the people they touch and to society at large. There were originally 3 learned professions, divinity, law, and medicine, each of which had access to levers of power that mediated for the citizenry at large, and they had special duties. In the 18th century, there was recognized a 4th learned profession, surveying, because it's really important to get the boundaries right. It's a highly skilled activity, and you trust for decades or centuries that follows what that surveyor does. My thought is we should have data science and the related fields that are bringing to life the technologies that I've given a kind of kaleidoscopic tour of. Those people bringing it, many of whom are in this room right now, it should be considered a learned profession. Your duty shouldn't just be to the company that employs you. It should be to society at large. It should be to raise flags when you see trouble or something that seems questionable, especially when the answer isn't clear. And we need to develop professions and professional mechanisms to work through those problems, the way that there are ethics boards among doctors, among lawyers, among surveyors, to figure stuff out. And it's still a realm in which you will have a chance to have an impact, whether through the companies you might work for or through the work you might do if you go into academia, through the engineering you might do if you build an app to do something. All of those things are basically right in front. And my hope, if you remember anything from my talk today, is to just think about the ethical moments you might be encountering as the passenger, as the driver, as the builder, and the way in which it could be so important to flag it, even if everybody else around you seems to think things are just fine. That, to me, is the kind of leadership that we are called to do. Thank you very much.